The studio lights were blinding. The air felt sharp, tense, charged with the kind of energy you only feel when millions of eyes are watching. And there he was, John Oliver, a man known for his razor wit, his quick jokes, his unshakable composure. But tonight, something was different. Because across from him, sitting calmly in that chair under the burning lights of late-night television, was Jonathan Roumie. Yes, the man who played Jesus in The Chosen. But tonight, he wasn't here as an actor. He was here as himself. And what happened, what was said, would leave John Oliver so shaken, so utterly thrown off balance, that he forgot, for one unforgettable moment, that he was live on air. It all began like any other segment. John had his cards in his hand, his trademark smile painted on, the audience laughing at every punchline. But beneath the humor, there was a nervous edge in his voice. He leaned forward, glanced at Roumie, and asked what seemed to be a simple question. So, Jonathan, you've played Jesus on screen. Millions of people see you almost as the face of Christ himself. But tell me honestly, when the cameras are off, when the spotlight fades, what does Jesus mean to you? The crowd chuckled softly, waiting for a clever, ironic twist. But Jonathan Roumie didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he leaned forward. He clasped his hands. And he said words that would change everything. Jonathan Roumie. John, Jesus isn't just a role I play. He's alive. He speaks. And if people would listen, if you would listen, you'd realize he's speaking right now. A silence fell, not just in the studio, but in every living room where the broadcast streamed. John Oliver blinked. For the first time in years, he had no comeback, no witty remark, no script to lean on. And that silence, that pause, was the beginning. The moment where humor collided with something deeper, something heavier, something eternal. The cameras were rolling. The audience leaned in. John Oliver forgot he was live. John Oliver. Wait, hold on. Are you saying you actually hear Jesus? Like a voice. Jonathan Roumie. Yes. The word hung in the air like thunder. Roumie, continuing, his voice trembling slightly, but filled with conviction. And I'm telling you now what he told me. He told me this world is drowning in noise, drowning in distraction. And he told me that if people don't wake up, if they don't turn their eyes to him, everything we think is secure will collapse. Gasps rippled through the audience. The laughter stopped. No one was sure if this was scripted, if it was a bit, or if something far more dangerous was unfolding on live TV. John Oliver glanced toward the cameras, then back at Roumie. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked cornered, and then he whispered, barely audible, John Oliver, what did he tell you about me? The audience froze. The crew froze. Even Jonathan Roumie seemed to hesitate, searching John's face as if weighing whether to answer. And then he spoke. Jonathan Roumie. He told me, you've been running, hiding behind jokes. You think if you laugh at everything, you won't have to face the silence. But Jesus sees you, even here, even now, and he's asking you to stop running. It was like a bomb dropped in the studio. John Oliver, speechless, pale, looked down at his desk. His fingers tightened on the cue cards until they crumpled. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't clap. They didn't breathe. And in that moment, for the first time in his career, John Oliver forgot. He forgot he was a host. He forgot he was live. He forgot the cameras, the crew, the millions of watching eyes. All he could hear were those words, that voice, and the echo of something he hadn't felt in years, if ever. He swallowed hard. His lips parted, and the words he spoke next were not jokes. They were not scripted. They were raw, real, and they revealed everything. John Oliver, voice trembling. If that's true, then what do I do? What am I supposed to do? Narration, dramatic pause. And with those words, the stage was set. The hook was complete. The tension, unbearable. Because what Jonathan Roumie said next would not only rattle John Oliver, it would ripple far beyond the walls of that studio, into homes, into hearts, into history itself. And it all began with one man, one voice. And the revelation that made a comedian drop his mask. On live television. The audience didn't know what to do. They had come expecting jokes, satire, laughter. Instead, they were witnessing something raw, something unscripted, something that felt dangerous. John Oliver's hands trembled slightly. The cue cards he always clung to were bent, nearly torn. He looked at Roumie, not as a guest, not as a celebrity, but as though he was staring at a mirror reflecting something he didn't want to see. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't the one in control. John Oliver, you're saying? I've been running. All this time. But running from what? I mean, what does Jesus want from me? Jonathan Roumie. He wants you. Not the performer. Not the clever host. Not the jokes. Just you. The real John. A murmur spread through the studio. The cameras kept rolling, but the director backstage was frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial. This was no comedy sketch. This was a collision between faith and satire, and the stakes felt larger than television. John shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the cameras, then at the live audience. But the usual armor of humor wouldn't come. His lips twitched, searching for a punchline, but no joke arrived. Instead, he leaned forward. John Oliver, this is insane. You can't just come on live television and say Jesus has a personal message for me. That's not how this works. Jonathan Roumie, it's how it's always worked. You just don't expect it to happen here, under the lights. But Jesus doesn't wait for the right set or the perfect script. He shows up where he chooses. The crowd shifted in their seats. Some laughed nervously. Others stared, eyes wide, as though something sacred had invaded the comedy stage. The tension wasn't just in the room. It was rippling outward, through cameras, into living rooms, across social media feeds. Clips were already being recorded on phones, uploaded, spreading like wildfire. The question was no longer just for John Oliver. It was for everyone watching. John Oliver. But what if I don't believe? What if I don't want to believe? Does that make me what? Broken? Condemned? Jonathan Roumie. No. It makes you human. But denial doesn't erase the truth. You can run from him, John. You can hide behind every joke you've ever told. But he will still be there, waiting. The audience gasped. The cameras zoomed slightly, catching the sweat forming on John's forehead. The man who thrived in pressure, who had destroyed politicians with wit, was suddenly unraveling, not because of ridicule, but because of revelation. And that's when the conflict exploded. Audience member, tell him, Jonathan, tell him what Jesus really said. Gasps. Security stirred. The crowd buzzed. John Oliver's face went pale. He turned, staring into the darkness of the crowd, then back to Roumie. John Oliver. What else did he say? The studio lights seemed to flicker. The world held its breath. Jonathan Roumie closed his eyes for a moment, as though listening to something beyond himself. Then he opened them. His gaze locked on John. Jonathan Roumie. He said, the stage you stand on is not yours. The laughter you create cannot save you. And the truth you avoid will one day stand in judgment of you. The words fell like a hammer. John Oliver's eyes widened. His lips parted. He looked utterly undone. The audience gasped again, some clapping, some whispering, others stunned into silence. And for one terrifying moment, the world saw John Oliver, not as the unshakable satirist, but as a man confronted with something far larger than comedy. John Oliver. I can't do this. Not here. Not live. Jonathan Roumie. That's exactly why it's happening here. Because when the world watches, masks fall fastest. You've spent years exposing everyone else. Now the light has turned on you. The conflict was no longer between two men on stage. It was between truth and denial. Between faith and skepticism. Between a comedian who built his career on mocking systems, and a moment he could not mock away. And as the cameras rolled, millions watched a man wrestle, not with politics, not with power, but with something eternal. The laughter had died. The conflict had begun, and the world was waiting to see which John Oliver would rise from it. The air was suffocating. The lights felt hotter. Every camera lens seemed to zoom in tighter, capturing not a comedy routine, but a man unraveling. John Oliver sat hunched, his usual sharp grin gone, his fingers nervously tracing the edge of his desk. Across from him, Jonathan Roumie sat with a calm intensity, his eyes locked like a man carrying a message too heavy to keep inside. The conflict had reached its breaking point, and now, the climax, the moment no one would forget, was about to erupt. John Oliver. You said Jesus spoke to you, that he sees me, that he's waiting. But why me? I'm just a comedian. I don't preach. I don't lead. Why me? Jonathan leaned forward, the studio falling into complete silence. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath. And then he spoke. Jonathan Roumie. Because he knows the weight you carry. Behind every joke, behind every laugh, you've been hiding pain. He knows the nights you can't sleep. He knows the questions you bury so deep, you don't even let yourself ask them. John froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Jonathan Roumie. And he told me, on this night, in this place, on this stage, he would reach you. Because no spotlight is brighter than his light, and no joke can drown out his voice. The audience gasped. Some even began to clap instinctively, though quickly silenced themselves. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was revelation. John's face turned pale. His eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to Roumie. Sweat traced down his temple. John Oliver. Stop. Just stop. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't. Jonathan Roumie. I don't need to know. He already does. The room erupted in whispers. Some of the crew backstage tried signaling to cut the feed, but the director, frozen, kept it rolling. Millions were watching. Millions were witnessing the unthinkable. A comedian, cornered not by ridicule, but by truth. John Oliver. What did he say about me? Jonathan's eyes softened. For a moment, even he seemed to tremble under the weight of the words about to be spoken. Then he spoke them. Jonathan Roumie, gently, yet with power. He said, you are loved, even when you don't believe it. He said you've been running from him, but he never stopped chasing you. And he said tonight is your moment to choose. The studio erupted, not with applause, but with stunned silence. John Oliver's hands shook. His eyes welled. This wasn't satire. This wasn't performance. This was raw, unfiltered confrontation. And for a moment, the world saw John Oliver stripped of everything but humanity. John Oliver. And if I don't? If I just keep running? Jonathan Roumie. Then you'll keep searching, John. Searching for peace and applause, for comfort and laughter. But the emptiness will always return, because only he can fill it. John's face collapsed into his hands. The audience stared, frozen, as he rocked slightly in his chair. It was no longer a late-night interview. It was no longer television. It was a soul on live display. And the climax had arrived. Jonathan Roumie. John, Jesus is speaking to you. Right now. The question is, will you listen? The cameras stayed locked. The audience sat in stunned silence. And the man who built a career on words couldn't find any. John Oliver forgot he was live. Because in that moment, it wasn't about ratings or jokes or satire. It was about eternity. And the world had just witnessed it unfold. The studio felt like a cathedral. The lights above, usually harsh and mechanical, seemed softer now, almost reverent. The crowd, still frozen in disbelief, sat in a silence so deep you could hear the hum of the cameras. And at the center of it all, John Oliver, his head buried in his hands, his body shaking with breaths he couldn't quite control. This was no longer comedy. This was confession. Jonathan Roumie, gently, leaning closer. John, look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, John lifted his face. His eyes glistened, wet with tears he hadn't wanted the world to see. But the world was watching. Jonathan Roumie, steady, compassionate. You don't need to hide. Not anymore. Jesus sees you. All of you. And he still calls you his. For a man who had built his career exposing the absurdities of power, John Oliver now looked utterly powerless. And yet, there was something in his expression, something fragile, something searching, that made millions lean closer to their screens. John Oliver. What do I even say? How do I even begin? Jonathan Roumie. You don't need rehearsed words. Just honesty. Just surrender. The audience leaned forward. The crew backstage pressed their earpieces tighter. Millions at home sat on the edge of their couches. And then, John Oliver, the man known for his wit, his sharpness, his fire, whispered words no one expected. John Oliver. Then help me. Help me talk to him. Gasps filled the room. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't scripted. This was surrender, live on air. Jonathan's face softened. He reached out, placing a hand gently on John's trembling shoulder. Jonathan Roumie. Repeat after me, John. Even if your voice shakes. John Oliver, nodding, whispering. Okay. And in front of the cameras, before millions, John Oliver repeated words that broke the system of satire and pierced the veil of entertainment. Jonathan Roumie. Jesus. I don't know how to do this. John Oliver. Jesus. I don't know how to do this. Jonathan Roumie. But I know I need you. John Oliver. Hesitant, then stronger. But I know I need you. Jonathan Roumie. I give you my doubts, my fears, my failures. John Oliver. I give you my doubts, my fears, my failures. Jonathan Roumie. And I ask you to be my Lord, to show me the way. John Oliver. And I ask you to be my Lord, to show me the way. The moment was seismic. A prayer, live on television. A confession, raw and unedited. The comedian who mocked systems of power had now bowed before a higher one, and the cameras caught every second. Backstage, some of the crew wiped their eyes. Audience members clutched their chests. At home, millions stared at their screens in stunned silence. No punchline, no laughter, just truth. Jonathan Roumie. John, you are heard. You are loved. And you are not alone anymore. John collapsed forward, burying his face in Jonathan's shoulder, shaking with sobs that had been locked away for years. And the world watched. Not a satire show, not entertainment, but a soul breaking free. When the cameras finally cut, the audience erupted. Not with laughter, but with thunderous, standing applause. It wasn't for comedy. It wasn't for spectacle. It was for redemption. And that night, the headlines would roar. John Oliver forgets he's live on air, finds faith instead. The story spread like fire. Clips went viral. Millions rewatched, stunned at the transformation. But for John Oliver, it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about a headline. It was about finally being found. And that's how a night meant for laughter became a night for eternity. Sometimes, the most unforgettable moments happen when the cameras are rolling. But the truth never stops rolling. And tonight, the world witnessed it live.